Welcome to Beyond Her Campus, celebrating 15 years. I'm Julianne Scriven, the Community Director at Her Campus, and we're excited to bring you this inspiring episode of our limited series podcast celebrating 15 years of Her Campus. In this series, we catch up with some of our most successful alumni, from news anchors and content creators to authors and mental health advocates. These women have incredible stories to share. Get ready for an insightful conversation filled with inspiration and advice. Let's jump in. Hi, Deepa. Thanks so much for joining us today and being part of Beyond Her Campus, celebrating 15 years. This podcast series is dedicated to honoring and celebrating alumni like yourself who have forged such inspiring paths after their time as a member of Her Campus. Tell listeners a little bit about who you are and what your role at Lonely Planet is.
Hi. Well, first off, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to talk to you. I, right now, am the director of social media at Lonely Planet, but my career has taken me in many different directions over the past decade plus since I graduated college. And I am just so excited to be able to revisit the past couple of years and how things have evolved for me as also digital media as an industry has evolved.
Yeah, digital media has shifted in so many ways to the point where when I was in my own undergraduate program 6 years ago, digital media and that concept wasn't really discussed. I took, I think, like one course on Instagram and what Instagram was, and there was an entire course on Twitter and how to use Twitter for journalism. But these were not concepts that people were thinking were going to lead to full-fledged careers. Take us back to your undergrad program. Tell us a little bit about what that dream job felt like and looked like for you when you were at UPenn and how Her Campus sort of fell into that.
Yeah, so I don't think I knew what my dream job even looked like at that age because I was so young, right? When I was entering college, I was 18, 19. My game plan was actually to become a doctor. And so I took a lot of pre-med courses, and then that eventually evolved into me wanting to be a clinical psychologist and planning to go get my PhD after school. And so all along the way of pursuing these more academic, like wanting to go to grad school, wanting to do research, wanting to get my name published on papers, that sort of drive that I had. I was working part-time at a couple of different research labs on campus. I was also pursuing writing for fun. Writing was always my passion project. It is something that I've loved doing as long as I can remember. Like I was that little kid when I was 7 or 8 years old, just like in a corner scribbling away at her journal. And so I held on to that in college because I never really anticipated making that into a career because I didn't know what it meant to be a writer. I truthfully didn't think that there was a world in which I could make a successful living as a writer. So it wasn't even an option to me. And so Her Campus was a way for me to continue to have fun with this hobby of mine without the kind of intense pressure of, okay, what grade am I going to get on this paper? It was very in line with my interests.
Very in line. Yes, very in line.
Yeah. So I think for me, as I went on in my career in college, it became apparent that what I thought journalism was evolving and changing over time. And for me, that kind of let a little bit of a light bulb go off in my head to be like, hey, what I thought being a journalist was sitting in a newsroom and churning out these articles day in and day out for a print daily newspaper. There are aspects of that still apply today, don't get me wrong, but the formats and the different ways of storytelling were starting to become part of the industry in a way that just didn't cross my mind when I was younger and thinking about what being a writer looked like. It was a totally different industry. I couldn't have predicted. There was no way for me to know that the job I have now, or many of the jobs that I would probably have even in the future beyond this, even existed when I was in college.
Absolutely. One of my favorite stories to hear from Her Campus alumna and also from people who are currently involved with their Her Campus chapter or in influencing in some capacity is hearing they went into it because they just had this overwhelming love for it that sort of was that driving force for them, even if they were pursuing something else, and then have sort of realized, oh, I love this. This is what's bringing me that joy. Tell listeners, especially those who are potentially kind of in that gray area right now where they're wanting to do a career that they've potentially been thinking about since they were a kid, but they have this passion, sort of that fire under them. What was that like for you to make that decision? And how did you really know that was the right thing for you to do?
I don't think there's an easy answer to that. And the best answer I've found is just time, because you don't really know how something is going to fit your personality or your interests until you do it. So there was a moment my senior year where I realized that was kind of the moment for me when I saw digital media evolving to what it was, and where I was like, hey, maybe I could do this. So how I got my start outside of campus into the world beyond campus journalism was I started freelancing for BuzzFeed and submitting articles, just like silly little listicles. Honestly, the first thing I wrote for them that really took off was about one of the original versions of the Urban Decay Naked palette. Like the
Oh,
eyeshadow.
wow.
Yeah,
that's absolutely.
that's a real throwback.
Yeah.
That I wrote that, I remember so vividly when I was procrastinating studying for an exam, and I just did it for the fun of it. And one of their editors reached out to me after that kind of hit their front page because I had submitted it through their community vertical, which was at the time just something that anybody could submit to. And they liked what I had been writing for them for free for so long that they said, hey, we will pay you to do this on a more regular basis. And that for me was a real light bulb moment of being like, hey, maybe people will pay me to write my silly little thoughts down on the silly little internet. Who knew? And from there, I kind of did this balancing act of I was writing my senior honors thesis, and get this, evolutionary psychology and behavioral economics. And at the same time, I was freelancing for BuzzFeed writing listicles about beauty products. So
very much using both sides of the brain. Yes.
Two very different things. And I realized it wasn't just that it was more fun to write about beauty products for me, but I really fell in love with the creativity you could have, whether it was changing the way you were representing things visually, how you were telling that story through format, how you were playing around with words. And in academia, there's a very clear structure. And I think it just wasn't pulling me in the way that I could have a lot more fun if I knew I thought about how to storytell across different formats. And so for me, the way I figured out that was the right, more long-term career for me to pursue was by doing a fellowship, which was a 3-month program that I did straight out of college. All my friends were looking for full-time entry-level jobs. And I said, okay, I'm just going to dip my toes in and try something different. And instead, I did a 3-month program at MTV that was called the Viacom Summer Associate Program, and I got placed within the MTV News department. And they didn't know what to do with me because they already had interns. So they kind of just treated me like a normal staff writer, which was wonderful because I got to spend that first summer out of college writing about lifestyle and music and entertainment for MTV. And I had a blast. I knew within a month that I wanted to really take it seriously and see where this could take me, because I knew I would always regret it if I didn't give it my all and give it a real shot. And I worked so hard those 3 months. I treated it like an extended job interview, and at the end they offered me a contract to stay on, and I ended up staying there for almost 4 years. And from there it was just the next thing and the next thing. It always just, one thing led me to another. And what I found to be helpful for me is to just always follow my curiosity. What is the next thing I want to learn about? What is the next format that is becoming a big thing in this space? And I really have never looked back. I know that sounds super cliche, but when I do look back, I say to myself, thank God I didn't go down this other path that I thought I wanted when I was younger. Not because there's anything wrong with it, but just because there was a whole world that has led me into spaces I didn't even know were possible. in a career path that I never thought was possible, that my parents and my family never thought were possible as immigrants from India. Like I grew up thinking that there were only really certain professions that you went into. And it has been so freeing and wonderful to be able to like build and design a career that nobody I really know has done for themselves in my family before me. And how cool is that?
It's so cool. And something you said, I'm still even hung up on, where you mentioned that you sort of let your curiosity guide you and you let that sort of depict where you're going. And I think social media is one of the coolest careers out there for the naturally curious because, to your point, it is always changing. TikTok right now is the platform, 4 or 5 years ago, it wasn't. It was all about Instagram. And then prior to that, everyone was using Snapchat and Facebook. It's ever changing and ever evolving. And even the way that we are consuming content on Instagram, for example, that tried and true platform, has shifted from imagery to video so quickly as well. How do you stay on the pulse of what your audience is wanting with Lonely Planet and what they're needing? And how does that excite you with those different platforms and platforms we don't even know about yet?
Yeah, I think the most important thing is to be on social media yourself and be extremely online, as they call it, because I don't have to try to be that. I just have always been that in whatever format was popular at the time. Like way back when, I was a Tumblr girl. I was spending way too much time on Tumblr and MySpace and Zanga and LiveJournal and all the forms of storytelling on the internet that was out there. I was trying to like turn my Neopets page into a blog at one point when I was young. It was out of control, but I'd never have to try to want to see what's happening on social media and see what's trending and see what's got everybody talking. It is a blessing and a curse that this is just the way I am. And I think that quality is really important for somebody who wants to get into this field, because otherwise it can feel like a really steep uphill climb to get acquainted with these new forms of communication, new channels for communication, if it isn't something that you aren't already naturally curious. And for me, it goes back to connection, right? It's all of these different ways of talking on the internet are all just about human connection and being able to connect with folks who are on the other side of the world, which to me just blows my mind. Like how insane that technology makes it possible for us to do that. And also for technology to just help us be able to surface all of our own stories and perspectives without having to go through any sort of gatekeepers.
Absolutely. I remember my own Tumblr phase, and I remember the sense of when I found other people who loved One Direction as much as I did, and not just, the people who lived in my neighborhood. And even that is such a warm feeling of getting to find other people who you would have never met in your day-to-day IRL at your coffee shop or at your school or in a classroom. It was so wonderful to see such a wide community that I think is really only been able to be fostered and developed since kind of that Tumblr day on, where now we get to have new friends and make connections and interact in ways that we've just never been able to. And I think similarly to you, that's what keeps the influencing space so interesting to me, is it is ever changing and ever growing. But I love the idea that it is ever changing and ever growing, essentially to give more access to people to tell their stories.
Exactly. And it's really up to you what you do with social media, right? It's a tool. It's a way to have a living scrapbook of your life, and you can treat it that way. It can be a tool to distribute messages. It can be a tool to stay in touch with folks. It's really up to you to design how it fits in your life, and if it fits into your life at all, and what that relationship looks like to be able to have it in your life in a healthy way. Like I have my own boundaries around social media. I have to, because I work in it. So I think that's equally important, right?
We get that question quite a bit here at Her Campus Media, is how do I work in social media, whether it is on that creative end, I'm working for a brand, I'm, in charge of crafting their social media plan, all the way over to I'm an influencer. It is my job to be so online all of the time, not only scrolling on my phone, but being physically present on somebody's screen. How did you determine when to set up those boundaries? And if you don't mind sharing with our audience, what advice would you have for those who are struggling to set those boundaries into place?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think I have gone through phases where I've really struggled with it. I used to work in a newsroom, and that was my first social media job, actually. It was at the Daily Beast, and I was doing their social media on weekday mornings. So across all their channels, my job was essentially 6 a.m. I would be up and I would be running their Twitter and their Facebook. And this was in 2018, so it was during Trump's presidency, and it was really tough on my mental health. And I couldn't turn it off because it was my job. And I don't have a good answer for that. In situations like that, it really forced me to lean on my support system to get me through that. And I do also think that there can be a lot of strength in admitting when you're in over your head and you need to step away and you're feeling a little burned out. That said, I think that as I've gotten older and I've worked in social for a variety of companies, not just hard news brands, but also brands that have nothing to do with news and who aren't tied to the news cycle, what I've realized is most important to me is working for companies and brands that I feel really align with my values and who I am as a consumer as well, because then it feels like much more of a natural fit to think about what type of content serves not only their audience, but like me, right? It helps me be able to evaluate things in a much more organic way, I'd say. And in terms of my own social media usage, one of the rules I've set for myself is if it is a format that is consistently making me feel bad about myself, or if it is somebody I'm following who's seeing their content consistently makes me feel bad about myself, then let me mute them, let me delete them from my following list if they're like an influencer or somebody who I don't know in real life and it wouldn't create any drama to unfollow them. But I don't watch people's Instagram stories. That's a hard and fast rule for me because it made me feel like everybody was hanging out without me.
Yes, that is like the Instagram story black hole.
Right, right. And I love posting to my own Instagram stories because it's a way for me to storytell and like craft a narrative. But that's what it is, right? It's a highlights reel. It's a narrative. It's clearly thought out from beginning to end. There is a curation happening. And I know because I do that myself, and it's hard for me to keep it in my head. Well, like everybody else does that too. So yeah, I know as soon as I start tapping into Instagram stories, it's all over for me. So I just don't even do it. I will not look. I definitely have missed things because of that. But you know what? It's fine.
Yeah, I think we get into a headspace where we decide, oh, the entire app is bad. But that is so detrimental, especially if you work in social media, you have to have the app. And then it's also a lot easier to stay connected and it is a lot harder to remove it entirely. So I really like the advice of finding the avenue that isn't working for you so you can still indulge and still have fun with the app without using every single feature that they are consistently rolling out.
Exactly. And it's also worth noting that each of these features, especially on Instagram, kind of have their own storytelling format, own algorithms, maybe even serve very different audiences in some cases. So the people that are watching the reels may not be the people who are watching or just interacting with carousel posts, who are replying to Instagram stories. I find TikTok for me is also very addicting, and I have to set up I have apps on my phone to limit the amount of time I spend on it. So that way I know hey, I can scroll TikTok mindlessly if I don't know, stretching or doing something otherwise productive or is something like that. But I cannot do it first thing in the morning or stay up late at night scrolling TikTok because then I know I'm just going to feel sluggish the next day or throughout the next couple of hours after that. So yeah, I'm still working on TikTok. TikTok's a tough one. They really know how to make it as addicting as possible.
Absolutely. And TikTok is fun. And I have learned so much from TikTok as well that it becomes one of those platforms that really do keep you so engaged. And I think having even a time boundary is healthy where it's not necessarily, again, you're not removing the app, but you're finding when it fits into your day so you can still have it be a huge part of your life, a huge part of your career without it being glued to your handset and glued to your hands.
Yeah.
You mentioned that you have had so many different roles through your post-grad career. Tell us a little bit about when you knew it was time to find a new challenge and it was time to leave one role to go to the next role.
Yeah, I think the answer is that I would realize that wherever I wasn't learning and I wasn't being set up for success, I think that can manifest in different ways, of course, but it's kind of a gut feeling. And once you start feeling it, it starts to nag at you. And if you haven't worked in a job that you've elected to leave yet, when the time comes, your gut will tell you. For me, it's always been a sense of like, okay, I want to try something new. Let me see how I can do that in my current job. Is it something that I can do within the scope of my current role, or is it something that I'm just hungry to learn about on my own outside of work? Is it just that I'm burned out and I need to take a vacation and I'll feel way better when I come back to it after that? Or is it that I feel like I am not being set up to succeed in the workplace and don't really see a future there where I can really lean into my strengths? If I see it's just going to be a slog and I'm dreading coming into work, that's no fun. I mean, my job right now genuinely makes me so excited. And I've had a lot of jobs over the years that have made me very genuinely excited to wake up on Monday morning and like get to work. And once you have that excitement, once you know what that feels like, it is so hard to give that up. It may fade, it may go away, and then you'll start to think about moving on to the next thing. But if you know what it feels like to be so excited about your work, anything else can just feel not as alluring, unless you're also getting that excitement from something other than work too, right? Don't get me wrong, life is not all about work, and it's all about seasons of life, right? There are times in my life where I have actively decided to kind of quiet quit and pursue something more exciting outside of my working hours or start a side hustle. There were many years where I did a lot of freelance journalism when I was working in a non-journalism job. So that way I still was able to scratch that itch, so to speak, while still having a healthier boundary around, hey, I know if I'm a full-time journalist, it can be really stressful and I can get burned out because it is just so exhausting to be writing day in and day out. The joke writers sometimes say to each other is that deciding to become a writer is like giving yourself homework for the rest of your life. And I definitely feel that. I have felt that very strongly some years. So I think it's all just about balance and figuring out like, okay, I'm here right now in this moment. What makes sense for me given the kind of life I want to live at this stage of my life?
Seasons of life is such a wonderful concept because I think it allows for everyone to give themselves a little bit of grace. If you are really excited about work in one season, that's wonderful. And then if the next you're really excited about a new life event or something else that's happening for you, it's all about finding what is going to benefit you most in that time. And I think that the two can be hand in hand, where you're really excited about a passion project outside of work and you're trying to balance also your full-time role that you are so excited about, you do still love, and giving yourself that patience and grace to try to balance both and setting up your day-to-day and your week over week in a way that is allowing you to emphasize both as well. And I think that a lot of people don't give themselves the understanding that it can be both and it can be neither. And that means that you might have to find something new.
Exactly.
I am curious, because we are talking on the Her Campus Celebrating 15 Years podcast, how did joining Her Campus impact your journey?
So I was the campus correspondent for the Her Campus University of Pennsylvania chapter. And when I joined that team, originally I started as an editor before becoming kind of the editor-in-chief of that chapter. It was the first time that chapter was ever on our campus, and it was probably pretty early. I think it was like around 2010. So it would have been 2010, 2011. It would have been right after they founded it. So none of us really knew what it was. And I think it was one of the first times in my career, not that I had really had a career at that point, but it was one of the first times in my life up until that point where it was kind of a blank slate. There weren't really rules or guidebooks or a set plan to follow in terms of, hey, you're part of her campus. This is what it looks like to have her campus on your campus. As I remember it, at least, it was kind of a do what feels right for your campus community. They will know better than we would know up at headquarters. At least that's how I remember it. I don't know if that was actually true, but I definitely just shaped it into what I thought our campus needed, which was at that time, we had a school newspaper, we had a couple different school magazines, and it was really competitive to get your writing into any of those publications because there were just so many people who wanted to write and not enough space to hold all of their writing. So I was feeling really discouraged, I remember, as an underclassman because I wanted to write, but I felt like I was a bad writer because I couldn't get my writing into any of the publications that upperclassmen were writing for. So I said, hey, let's just make the Her Campus something that everyone who wants to write can write for, because I feel like, and I do still firmly believe this, college, university is a time for exploration and trying things out. And you have the freedom to just pursue your interests in a way that kind of dwindles as you get older and start to have all these other responsibilities, and you have to think about your finances and rent and all of that fun adult things, all that fun adult stuff. And I really wanted Her Campus to just be fun and not be a gatekeeper or be stuck up or exclusive. I just wanted folks who wanted to write to be able to find somewhere that they could be mentored by editors, even if those editors themselves were just people a couple months older who had taken maybe like one more writing class than them in school, right? I just wanted people to feel like they could have an avenue into having their stories heard. I just wanted people to feel like there was a place where they could tell their stories, even if it wasn't necessarily the like most polished way of packaging that story. Because again, you're in university, like you're supposed to be learning how to do these things and experimenting and growing and figuring it out and getting feedback as you go. I just really wanted to provide that. And I think that aspect of it has stuck with me over the years, because now as I have gotten older and I have moved into leadership positions and I've gotten to see how different industries work as well as how corporate works, looking back, that was one of the first times where I really was able to just be like, okay, here's something. How do I make something out of nothing? And that is actually how progress happens in the real world too, right? Is how do you take an idea or an inkling and how do you plan around it? How do you build it into something? How do you take something out of your brain and then put it into the real world in some tangible way to make an impact on people? And all of those skills started when I was in college, and Her Campus was part of that.
Her Campus is truly designed to be a launching pad for folks to get to learn what makes them excited to show up for, what they are good at, and what they are potentially wanting to or needing to improve. And I love that you were able to recognize that Her Campus was a space where you could grow something from nothing. And I think that has served so many folks in very many different industries as well to think like, okay, if this is a blank page, a blank slate, a blank internet browser, what do I fill this with that is going to be my story and impact those around me in a way that I think is really needed? The community piece that you touched on as well, I so appreciate, especially as the director of community, because I think providing spaces for people on campus where they might not be finding it already is something that allows Her Campus to be a home for so many people too. So I really, really appreciate all of that. I have a few rapid fire questions for you that we are asking all of our guests here on Beyond Her Campus.
Yeah, let's do it.
The first one is, what would you tell your 21-year-old self?
Wow, 21-year-old self. I would tell her to not be afraid to speak up more and to try new things more. I think as I've gotten older, I have started to be a lot more fearless, and that fearless when I was younger. And I wish younger me would have taken more risks and felt pride in that.
There's a lot of power in being young and having the freedom to take the risk. And there's an even greater power in knowing you are young and knowing you get to take the risk.
Absolutely, yes.
And I think that that's really exciting to be a young person, especially now where social media gets to be part of all of our daily lives. All right, next one is, what is something you are looking forward to?
Well, right now, I'm really excited for this long weekend and to hang out with my cat here in my apartment in New York City.
Dorian Gray.
Dorian Gray. Yeah. I've lived in Manhattan for the last 10 years. I'm a writer in New York. Like, what? In what world would I have ever been a writer in New York? Every time I think about that, it blows my mind. I didn't think this would have been possible 15 years ago.
Wonderful. And it's so cool when the thing that you're looking forward to is waking up in the morning and getting to live your day-to-day life. And I think that that's something that everyone can kind of strive for, is the thing that you should look for most is every day.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you so much for joining us and coming onto the podcast. Lastly, tell our listeners where they can keep up with you and keep up with Lonely Planet.
Yes. Well, I'm at Deepa on Instagram, Twitter, Threads, and at Deepa Lakshmin on TikTok and Facebook and everywhere else. I think those are the main ones. And then at Lonely Planet, everywhere, you'll see lots of fun travel inspiration and travel guidance. So if you love to travel as much as I do, you should definitely follow those accounts.
Thanks for joining us, Deepa.
Thank you.
That wraps up another episode of Beyond Her Campus, celebrating 15 years. We hope you enjoyed today's conversation. If you loved this episode, be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. And don't forget to leave a review. We'll be back in 2 weeks with more incredible stories from our amazing alums. Until then, HCXO!